Welcome, fam. We are live with Unpublic, another episode that I think you're really going to like. Today's guest is Shaka Mitchell. He is the Tennessee State Director for the education nonprofit American Federation of Children, not to be confused with the American Federation of Teachers. We center students and young people on this show, and we center the outcomes of them. So, Shaka, welcome, and thank you for joining this morning.
Thank you, Chris. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, I feel like I should say what do they always say, like long time viewer, first time caller.
First time viewer, no, long time viewer. Well, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate anyone who comes, who shows up in the morning to talk about our children, to talk about our young people, and not just to talk about it, but to be informed and then to help lead us to action. Like, what could we possibly do that would further the cause of justice for children? That's what I'm about. That's kind of my personal mission. Along those lines, I do have a quick kind of commercial break before we get started here. My family at Brightbeam would be on top of me if I did not mention that today we are doing a day of action. Today is March 31st. It's a day of action that we're having on getting all kids connected. Currently, I don't know if you all would know this, but currently there are still millions of kids that aren't connected. 12 million kids still don't have adequate access to high-speed broadband. We think that it's time to correct that. And we believe that the funds and the solutions all are already within the FCC. One thing that we are pushing on is something called E-rate. It's a little bit too weedy for me to get into right now. But what I would say to you is go to my social media, go to either my Instagram or to Twitter. You'll find some infographics on what the problem is and a link to our Voices to Action page where you could take action right now today. Low lift opportunity for you to fight for justice for children without even having to break a sweat. So find me on Twitter. I'm at Citizen Stewart. You'll find the information there, or you could go to brightbeamnetwork.org. You'll find more information about our Voice to Action page there. You could also go to Voices to Action or voicetoaction.org, and you'll find all of this information. Let's get every kid connected. Let's close the homework gap. And let's have internet for all, because we are a first world country and we can do it. So Shaka, sorry about that. Jumping in with the commercial right from the beginning. But, we have to work. You and I have to work, I think, all that we possibly can to open up every opportunity and get every resource to kids that don't have them. Like, that's just got to be a goal for us.
Yes.
And your report that you have out now that I want to discuss is called The Warmth of Other Schools. I actually put the link to it in the comments. So for people listening and watching, if you want to see The Warmth of Other Schools, I'm going to keep tripping over that a little bit. Yeah. The link is in the comments there. But I'll just start out with you. Like, what is the headline? What is the big thing that you guys wanted to accomplish with this report?
Yeah, I think the big kind of idea is that in a world in which school choice programs, parent choice programs are becoming more prevalent, we see this, week by week right now, where these choices are becoming available for parents. We think that's a fantastic thing. That being said, it's not just about a student getting in the door of a school that's better than, say, their zone school or the one that they were sort of zip coded for. The quality of the school and how the school meets that student's needs, that matters, right? And so we wanted to equip school leaders really with some very practical ideas and tactics for how school leaders can better serve historically underrepresented students in private schools. So that's kind of the subtitle. How can private schools better serve historically underrepresented students? Because again, it's great that it's becoming more and more possible for students that look like you and me to attend. But what happens once they're there? We want to make sure that the experience has got to be great for students once they're in the building.
Do you have something that was prompting that? Was there, were you alarmed by something that was making you say it's a time to have this conversation?
Well, I'm not sure that I was. I'm not sure that alarm is quite the thing.
Yeah.
But there's
Or was
a
there
lot of
anything? Yeah. Like
yeah,
what made
yeah,
it the moment to talk about this now?
yeah. I mean, I think there's just listen. Um, the past 2 years. I don't know. Depend upon how you're measuring. The past 2 years or the past 400 years, it's been a struggle, right?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
but I think in the past couple years, um, topics of sort of new civil rights, if you will, social justice, inclusivity, diversity, equity. Those are in the atmosphere much more than say 10
Hmm.
years ago, right?
Hmm.
And I would say to their credit, I actually have had a lot of private school leaders, private school board members ask me over the past 2 years, 3 years. They said, "Hey, we actually want to serve students who are not in our existing community, but
Hmm.
we don't know what we don't know. How do we do it well?" And really appreciate that kind of candor, right? When they sort
Hmm.
of say, "Hey, we want to do this, but we appreciate that we may not be ready." So I think that's part of it. But I also think this is a good time because we see even in public schools, there's this misconception that because it has the word public attached, it means it's serving everybody well. And let's just be honest about it. Um, that's not the case. And so I think
Hmm.
families are looking for an exit. They're looking for a better climate. We believe that in some cases, private schools are going to be that. But again, um, we've got to do better for the kids.
Yes, in some cases, that work is going to be new to some of those private schools, and in some cases, not. I mean, you and I were just talking right before we jumped on about the fact that there are some private schools that have been serving kids of color forever. Like that's all they've,
Yeah,
been.
that's right.
Um,
That's right.
and I wonder if I really wonder if they're going to be taking the lead with the other schools to kind of say like this isn't new to private schooling. Like is we didn't just all of a sudden show up with kids of color, but some of y'all are going to get more kids of color as choice opens up, and you're not ready.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and it sounds
and I'll
like you're
tell you,
saying they're welcome to that conversation.
I think they are. I mean, I just think, listen, this is my personal view on it, but um, I don't begrudge people who are late to the conversation
Hmm. Hmm.
if they are in the
If they
conversation
come.
now. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Come on. Now, if you're just saying that's not a conversation we're willing to have, that's a problem. No,
Yeah.
but if you're late to the conversation, I don't want to beat people up because for whatever reason they just came to it, right? And
Hmm.
so I think we've got to say, all right, you're just getting started. I mean, frankly, one of the things we say in this report is don't jump right in.
Hmm.
Don't have the idea and think, "Ooh, we need to quote diversify. We're going
Hmm.
to start doing it tomorrow." We actually say, "No, you need to do some self-examination first
Hmm.
before you even before you jump into the deep end because that's where we see a lot of the blunders."
Yeah, I would hate for schools to run out, get a consultant, start putting a bunch of posters up on the wall, a bunch of Kobe
Yes.
posters and King James posters, up on the wall, and then be like, "Okay, we ready," and then have a problem, with parents or students or whatever that we see showing up in the news all the time. Public schools, private schools, charter schools, everybody's got work to do.
Yeah.
Want to ask you, you actually are like one of the lucky ones, and by lucky ones I mean you had choice, you had an opportunity in life to go to a private school, but there's not one experience for that. Like I talked to different people and they went to different kinds of private schools. What was your
Yeah.
experience like in a private school?
Yeah. My experience was that so I grew up. Well when I was a kid on Long Island, New York, and
Mm-hmm.
very working class, lower income area in Hempstead, Long Island, and the neighborhood schools were not quality. They were not safe. I remember a story about kids setting the carpets on fire in the high school, and which is a creative way to get out of school. But it was just not that was not the environment. Now, we were very, I'll say, blessed to be a part of a local Catholic, parish. And so my parents put me and my siblings in Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
My parents worked for the U.S. Postal Service. We were not rich. Good jobs, but again, not rich. We went to a Catholic school that was I guess pre-K through 8 school, and you figure one classroom per grade level, and there were probably 15 white kids in that school. I mean, it served African American, Latino, kids primarily, and we had by and large an excellent experience. I mean, my sister would divert from that, but I think that's mostly because her sense of fashion was offended by the uniforms. But it is what it is, and I'll tell you, I think that made a tremendous difference for at least I and my siblings. And then we did the other form of school choice that's always existed, and that is we moved. We packed up I-95 and we moved outside Atlanta, and then I attended a public school. So those two forms of choice have always existed. Either you pay for it or you pay to move into a different neighborhood. But that was our experience. And again, that was a very our school was not one of these $25,000 a year. I mean, it was subsidized because we were members of that church. We were getting every discount we could.
No, I think it's so interesting, that part. Whenever people argue with me about private schools or private school choice, they run right to the schools, number one, that they think are the most problematic in terms of they don't let people in, or they're going to be super white, or they're, so having grown up in New Orleans where there was a system of Black Catholic schools, and that was just normal. That was just part of the normal fabric of the city. And it was completely accepted. It wasn't accepted. It was actually rooted, because it was just your cousins and your uncles and, friends and people who did good things in government or whatnot came out of the Catholic schools, and they were mostly Black. These Catholic schools weren't super white, and they weren't super expensive. They were affordable to working class people. If you were Catholic and you were showing your butt up at mass and doing what you were supposed to do, right? This is what people don't want to put into work, but you got to show up. Our local, our parish school was Epiphany in our neighborhood. I went there for 1 year. It's funny you mentioned some students set the carpets on fire. Little known story. I set the garbage cans on fire, and ended up with my grandmother down there with Sister Cecilia talking about what I had going on. We had these Irish nuns who ruled the roost, not just in the school, because the school was part of the community. Even if we didn't go to that school, there was still bingo there, multiple nights a week, and other stuff would happen there. And Sister Cecilia, whether or not you were in the school or not, she was Sister Cecilia in the neighborhood, right?
Yes.
But I find even in the limited amount of time that I was actually in the building, they were part of the community. I still find myself today, as old as I am, with things that were taught to me back then, morally, or it was more than just the education. A lot of it was things that stick with you for life about, philosophy, morals, things that. Do you find yourself relying on some things that you got out of that experience still, even to this day?
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned Sister Cecilia. Maybe does every Catholic school just have a Sister Cecilia? That's because we had one, and even as you say it, I'm I can see her walking around with the ruler, pop, pop, pop. Just tapping the desks if you were not paying attention to your handwriting. I think there are definitely things that stick with me. I mean, I remember certain teachers working with me or my sister after school on certain things, right? On like certain academic things. I am pretty sure that now knowing what I know about schools, I do not think those teachers were getting bonuses. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm,
I
hmm.
think one of the things that I learned is just how mission oriented schools can be. Um, how, frankly, it's not all about the money, because though we were paying, we were not a school that was so where we were so like richly resourced that made the obvious difference. You know, there were probably zone schools that were getting more money for their building
Hmm.
and whatnot.
Hmm.
It wasn't about the money; it was about what are we doing with it. I mean, our school had to make a huge point of engaging families. That was a huge issue. It wasn't just you dropped your kids off and that's a wrap. I mean, the school, boy, they were on it. This is before charter schools, of course, that you and I were in school. They did not mess around and would call your parents up there in a minute. And if that's
Hmm.
an inconvenience, it's an inconvenience. But what it meant is that there was a partnership among the adults. You
Hmm.
know, this was
Hmm.
not childcare. This was an institution for learning. So I don't know. Yeah, lots of lessons there. Um, yeah, I'm so appreciative for the difference it made. But I think it also begs the question. And that's probably how I got started in education, was thinking like, that's great that we were afforded that opportunity.
Hmm.
What about I mean, I have friends down the street. What about my friends down the street who didn't have that opportunity? And you can see slowly the differences, you know, over time. And
Not in some cases,
yeah,
not even slowly. I mean, that was my experience in New Orleans, was just that getting into the Catholic school. So, my, I have a wide family set in New Orleans. Um, um, Ranging from just a big range, just a lot of difference in my family across my cousins. I have a system of cousins, and if you look at kind of what fortunes people came into, and then look at to like where they went to school, it makes a difference. You get to start seeing, and like one of our proudest schools was St. Aug. So if you went to St. Aug, very black school, very much like
mm-hmm.
strict, paddle on the wall type of thing, and but they turned out, it was like a mini Morehouse or something. They turned out just generations of strong black men who went into the world and did strong things. Like I have an uncle who was a chemist who came out of that school very proud of the life that he built, but a lot of it was built in St. Aug, right? So it's
Yeah,
part of the fabric. But you're right. If you didn't get into those schools, your fortunes changed a lot. Not completely, because there were still some magnet schools and some other special
yeah,
opportunities. But and I would like to see more doing that work. One thing that I found interesting about your report is that right now we're in a moment right now where there is a backlash to all things diversity, to all things critical race theory or restorative justice. And in your report, I'm looking at it and I just noticed that a lot of it is about doing good diversity and inclusion work and restorative justice and all these things that seem to be running against the grain of the conservative side of the world.
yeah,
How are you guys working with that? Like, because school
yeah,
choice is seen as a very conservative thing,
yeah,
and school choice stays out of the culture wars. But right now, the conservatives are not staying out of the diversity thing. So how's that
yeah,
working for you?
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, listen, I would be remiss if I didn't, frankly, just give a shout out to my colleagues at American Federation for Children, who, you know, when I kind of had this idea for this report, and by the way, the tactics in the report, these are not like copywritten to Shaka Mitchell, right? I mean, we spoke with a lot of professionals who've been doing this work for a long time, and so want to honor their input. But when I had this idea, our leadership at AFC didn't really blink, because we believe it's in the best interest of kids, of
Hmm.
students,
Hmm.
and we want to serve students well. And that should mean that we're having hard conversations, right? The other thing, I mean, I'll sort of say so I'm in Tennessee, and in Tennessee, school choice has been predominantly aligned with kind of a more conservative thought, like politically, whatever. Here's the thing. If you are not down with this report, if you're a school that's not down with this report, if you're not down with, I don't know, purging your textbooks of happy, smiling slaves, right? If you think that's just offensive, okay. If you're a private school, like, okay, don't purge your textbooks of that, but be transparent about that.
Mm-hmm,
and I actually want to know, right? I don't want to be surprised when I send my kids to a school only to find out midway through the year that they believe there was a such thing as happy slaves. I want to know on day one. I want to know on day zero, right?
Yes.
So that we can avoid that whole thing to begin with. So I'm okay with if you're listen, if you're a bigot, okay, I want to know that.
Yes.
Let it be known.
You're speaking my language now because, listen, I just love good labeling in the world. It saves so much time. It just saves so much time.
It does.
Like I read the labels on things and I like just know, up close and, quick. Like, does this have sugar in it? Oh, there's sugar. Okay, well, I should be messing with that because, I got the sugars. Like that's just what you need to know. And I wish that schools, people who have been on this integration train don't understand choice. The reason I want choice in the world is because I want to be able to find the fit and the humane education for my kid. Not for everybody's kid, but for mine. Right. And I know I'm gonna have to wade through some stuff in the process to find that. So why not have some truth in advertising? I straight up just wish schools would say, we're a racist school. And I'd be like, good. Yeah. Good for you, but racists deserve an education too. Y'all do you,
Yes. And I'll tell you, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm actually hopeful for with and why targeting this towards private schools is because given the backlash that you talked about around some of these concepts that we've had, in the past year, in some ways, private schools can be more responsive, and they're able to do the right thing sooner. Right? Mm-hmm. Here's what I mean: a private institution is, necessarily a mission-oriented institution that is not subject to the changing winds of democracy. Right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So here in Tennessee, we have this is, current controversy right now. We've got the basketball team up at one of our institutions. It's East Tennessee State University. Some of the students kneeled during the national anthem. Right. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, our state Senate or a majority of our state senators were offended by that and issued a statement. The basketball coach was just let go. Now you got students entering the transfer portal, whatever they're gonna transfer. In some ways, that's because that's a public university, right? Mm-hmm, the state government, the elected officials can tinker with, how sort of culturally responsive even the student athletes are. Now, who knows? Does this end up in court? I don't know. That's for other people. If that same thing happens at Vanderbilt University, a private institution, nobody can say boo about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The legislature doesn't get involved. School boards. We've got a lot of school boards, especially in the South, that are absolutely offended that we might, insinuate that hundreds of years of slavery was a bad thing. It's like the clutching of pearls is.
And this is what to me, like, with school choice, there are no panaceas in education. So
Yeah.
parents, people listening to this to me right now, I'm just going to say straight up, there are no panaceas. The one thing that's eternal, that's never going to stop, is that as a parent, you're always going to have to be vigilant about where you're putting your child. No matter whether it's public, private, semi-private, hybrid, no matter what it is. When you go looking for daycares is your very first indication that you're going to have to be on your P's and Q's for the rest of your life, because you start looking at these daycares and you're kind of like, yeah, that one's not going to work. And then you go to another one and you're like, yep, that one's not going to work either. I'm not leaving my baby here. That feeling you should keep with you for the rest of your, parenting life, because schools, but this, we do have a nostalgia about public schools, and we're forgetting things like what you just said. For instance, we talk about local control all the time, like it's the greatest thing ever, unless you are living in a racist county where the school board is doing things like making sure that all your curriculum removes any hint of the idea that America has been unfair to some people, right? And that's something that can happen in public schools. Definitely can happen in private schools. I mean, people select some private schools specifically because they want that. And I'm for them. Like, listen, we don't all have to go to school together. We really don't, right?
That's true. That's true.
All of our kids don't need to exactly be in the same room. Like, we got different things going on, different religions, different backgrounds, different worldviews. I want to share something from the report just really quick to show people some of the I just consider straight up technical. The report has a lot in it about what leaders and school leaders in private schools can do to make things more equitable for students. And I love some of it because it's basically, a lot of it was from the very beginning, make your school even accessible, make your websites accessible so that people can have a honest opportunity to access your school, to be able to see it and just to be there. You had things in the report around like building in communities where you're needed, like, build your school in a place where, more people of color exist and need a good education. Here's some other things on your roadmap for school leaders, underneath 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 headings. I think, is there another one? No, that is the 5. You had ideas and strategies under each, but planning for your work. And I think you had mentioned earlier, don't just jump in and kind of like we said earlier, throw up some posters and, start trying to get in. Plan for the work, be planful.
Well,
go ahead.
May I just say on that point, Chris, because I think a lot of schools want to do what we see businesses do all the time, which is they hire a diversity consultant, right? And in the school context, that's especially the wrong thing to do, because now you just put all of the responsibility to, quote, fix it on perhaps the only person of color on your staff. And that's just not, that's not fair to that person. So we really think when you're planning for the work, you gotta do more than just hire a quick consultant and like plant the flag and say, all right, mission accomplished.
Yeah, I'm looking at the stuff that's under planning for the work. There's just some very, I think, super smart things here that are going to require leaders to be more reflective about the work and thoughtful about how they engage in it, which would, to me, prevent pitfalls. You have down the list somewhere, it says lead from the top. I actually think, Shaka, on the next printing of this report, that should be at the top. That should be the top bullet. Lead from the top, because people know, your staff know you're not serious when you don't lead from the top on these things.
That's right.
And people won't trust it. So, aside from planning for the work, building and supporting a diverse representative faculty. I don't know if I saw it in here. What is the, did you guys have any takeaways about the composition of private school staff right now?
No, I don't. And that's a great question. But, anecdotally, I'll tell you, one of the things we did in this is we looked at, some of the hard data, but we did a lot of interviews, with faculty, staff, alumni from private schools, because I actually think that like color commentary, that's where the real rich information is, because you hear some ways, and we included some of when it goes wrong. And like, you just know sometimes when it goes sideways and you're just like cringing to read it. I would, and listening and doing some of these interviews, you're hearing about when it goes wrong. On the building and diverse faculty, there is a little anecdote in here, and it's from a young man who named Jacob Idra, and Jacob's in Omaha, Nebraska. Went to and his family is of African descent. He's a first generation, American, and he went to this like, pretty elite, almost exclusively at the time, white school. And there, he talked about how nice it would have been to have a faculty member that, in some of those moments, he could just say, hey, Mr. Stewart, can we just talk?
So he didn't see like a lot of staff that reflected him.
He didn't. And and to his great credit, as just a really powerful young man, he is now in university. He's at Creighton University. He is on staff back at that school.
Oh, wow. Now see, that's a good story.
And like, that's just like, that's the virtuous cycle. And that's that's a beautiful thing.
And I love that. Well, that's a great way to phrase it too. That is a great virtuous cycle. Because, sometimes back to your first point here about planning for the work, your very first bullet is examine the historical context of your private school. Sometimes the solutions to the things that you uncover aren't going to be immediate, but you do have to be planning for the long term.
Totally.
I remember when I was on the school board, I had a colleague on the school board who was Japanese. She wasn't Japanese. She was Asian, but she was very much into Japanese culture. And she would say things to me times about their culture. And I remember we were talking about doing a strategic plan for the district. And I said to her, I said to our entire group that, it was too short of a strategic plan. But someone else was proposing like a 10-year plan. And I was like, a 10-year plan also, though, seems really long, like in that we're not all going to be here or whatever, necessarily we're not. And she said, Chris, Japanese people plan for 500 years. And I was just like, well, I guess you just trumped me.
Yeah. So my spreadsheet doesn't have that. It doesn't go that far.
No. But I mean, definitely like, for instance, in the Catholic religion and in schools, you should be planning for the longer view of how you're going to do things. Not everything has to be immediate gratification, but I mean, that's a great story. He's in the school as a student. He sees a lack, a missing. It's a testament to them that he would come back and even want to teach there too, though.
Yeah. And I think a testament to that young man, Yeah. I mean, he's just a tremendous young man. And they've seen, I think because of it, he's actually seen the number, the sort of percentage of, in this case, students of color increase. Right. And that's always a very tricky thing. And I'm somewhat sympathetic to it when organizations that look predominantly one way, and that doesn't have to be white, that can be any way.
That's right. That's true.
An organization, whether it's a school, a church, a business that is predominantly one way, it is very hard to actually change the composition. Right. And so how do you do it? Well, you can't do it if everyone just remains on the sideline and no one engages in the work. You have to someone has to get in there and be a pioneer. And so I'm really thankful for folks like Jacob who will do that.
Well, on this particular bullet that you have here, building and supporting a diverse and representative faculty, I think the kind of the ideas that you have beneath that are ones that make it easier to attract somebody, but not just attract, but have an environment, have a culture in which they'll want to stay. Lots of schools have, I think, a bigger issue with retention than they do actually hiring. Like, they can find people, but those people aren't going to stay for very long. Look at some of the things you have here. Create intentional hiring practices, add DEI for those watching, diversity and equity and inclusion as a component of school evaluations, have ongoing professional development, leverage community liaisons, and ensure your application process is accessible to a wider group of folks. All of those things to me mean that you're doing more than just saying, yeah, we want to get somebody through the door here. You're thinking more broadly about, yeah, but how are we going to create the culture in which we'll know whether or not it's good for them.
Yes.
You have another one here about fostering racial diversity, which I think is a good one. A little bit tricky again too, Shaka, because I mean, like the very first thing you have here is utilize multicultural curriculum and culturally responsive pedagogy. And I imagine for some private schools, that's a that's a stretch. Like that's a hard one.
Sure. And listen, I am kind of like you. I think let 1,000 flowers bloom. I mean, if you read that line and you're a school leader and you say culturally responsive pedagogy, and you go, we're not doing that. Okay, fine, don't do it. But then then you're just going to look a certain way. And I believe that, by the way, that this report is not, even though we said the subtitle is how to better serve underrepresented students, this report is going to better serve, or the things in this report are going to better serve the entire school community. This is not charity for students of color, charity for, low-income students. Your whole school community will be more vibrant if you do things like have a culturally responsive pedagogy that we believe. Yeah.
I think is interesting about this within so-called school reform, or the so-called reform movement. Not everybody agrees on what choice should look like and what choices should exist. One very clear bifurcation within, you just said, let 1,000 flowers bloom. For some people, there's a camp where there is definitely that group, and there's a camp that are anti 1,000 flowers bloom. They want every school to look similar in what they consider to be quality.
Yeah.
There's a very loose fitting definition of what that should be and whatnot. We find this a lot in the charter movement. Minnesota is very much 1,000 flowers bloom state. So where I live, it's very much like, you got an idea for a charter school, start a charter school. You got all these different kinds, and not everybody's got to come to your charter school. In other places, they hate Minnesota because they're kind of like, they want the big box, very regimented,
brand name
school. And it feels like in school choice, there's a little bit of that too. Yeah, but how are we going to know that these are quality schools that you have a choice from? And there's a lot of distrust for parents. To make good choices.
Listen, that's a whole. I mean, you've done episodes on that. That's a whole show right there on the how quickly what even ed reformers and policymakers, how quickly what they end up showing is that they don't really trust parents to make choices. And what I'll say is, I don't trust parents to make choices for my kids, but I trust them to make choices for their kids, right?
Yes.
And I mean, to your point too, if you came to school choice kind of through the more libertarian door, and and no shade, right? That's just,
it should not be none, because we about to have it out, Shaka.
No. Listen, I'm there too, in large part, but I think this is thinking about this choice and quality and kind of the intersection between them. If you came through kind of that libertarian door, there is the temptation of thinking that the free choice alone indicates that you're satisfied with the quality. Give me liberty and give me death and all this, and but I got news for you. Like, I don't fear death. There are far worse things, and one of them is being trapped alive in a system that would prefer to suppress you and oppress you. And it's a little bit like if we've all been on kind of road trips, and you're out in the middle of nowhere, and you finally pass that exit, and there's a couple different food, restaurants on the thing. Well, if you are hungry, I mean, you're going to pick one of them, but that does not mean that you are just enamored with the Hardee's over the Arby's and the McDonald's, right? You're just picking. And so again, the choice alone doesn't mean that there's that the work is done. And that's like some of the nuance we wanted to pull out in this, that the choice is of course important, but let's actually listen as school leaders in particular. Let's listen to make sure it's working, because this is something that, frankly, our elders in the African American community, I think this is a vestige of desegregation, and that is, here's what I mean to say. And of course, I'm thankful for all of the work that was done. It was necessary, but the fight was not just to get us in the building. We wanted what was happening in the building. We wanted what was happening in schools, right? Because what happened as soon as we were able to get in the building? We found that they had moved all the good books to the other school. We found that they had moved all the good teachers to the other side of town. It's not just about getting your foot in the door. The quality does matter.
Yeah, I think questions of quality are always going to be a little bit controversial to me because there might be 99 things like I don't know your kids, Shaka. I don't know them very well. So if you put me in power of just picking a general school based on some general quality factors, I can tell you that good teachers, strong curriculum, a coherent educational philosophy, good use of data, great assessments, teachers who believe that their students can always do more than what we think that they can do. All of these things are going to be good ingredients to a quality school. And I could pick a school that has all those things that's completely terrible for your particular child.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Right.
And I know this just be having multiples who have to go to the same couple of schools because of where I live. They all have to go to the same door, but in a perfect world, they wouldn't have to, because I know my kids are very different. They have some very different stuff going on. So the quality thing is always, but the thing that is more important to me is it a humane fit for your specific child, not some kind of set of factors that's supposed to work across a lot of different kids,
Yeah. And it's so easy. Or it's not even easy. I think it's lazy when we apply one even ed reform strategy, or it's more like a tactic, more like this happens in the school building to all kids. It's it's a reason that in the work of other schools we separated out racial diversity from socioeconomic diversity, because those two things are not necessarily the same. There's often a lot of overlap in our country, but there are different, these are different factors, and it's a bit lazy to conflate them.
I love that point too, for one very important reason, which is you would almost swear to God that middle-class Black people don't exist.
Yeah. It's middle income, it's low income, and then it's Kanye West.
Exactly. Like in
Will
between,
Smith,
Tyler Perry and Oprah, there's the mom who works 3 jobs, who, has to take the bus 20 miles for each of those jobs, blah, blah, whatever. And it's not to put down that example. Number one, it's to say, I think we use that example as a stereotype too much that we don't understand, because even people in the low income are way more nuanced in the way that they're living life than we ever give credit for. We say low income, and we just think that means something, right? That doesn't mean anything. There are all different kinds of ways to be low income. There's all different kinds of ways to be in that situational poverty or chronic poverty or generational poverty. There's different ways of being there. So we talk about this one group, and then we for sure ignore. This is why I love what you just said, separating socioeconomic diversity from racial diversity, because we believe that oftentimes people associate Black people, period, with being in the socioeconomic diversity part 2 in low income. And you're missing whole sets of families that aren't low income. They still might have problems in your school.
That's right.
They might still come to your school and still have an issue because they're Black.
Yeah. I'll tell you, so I'm in Nashville, and in Nashville, there's a number of different Montessori schools, and my girls all actually attended Montessori until elementary school. So they went to pre-K, And, it worked for our family. There is one Montessori school in particular, though, that is predominantly African American families. And it's even in a part of town that's, frankly, it's a little bit dicey, this part of town, whatever. But here's the thing. The families that attend this Montessori school, you have a lot of healthcare professionals, doctors, realtors, lawyers. The tuition at this Montessori school is higher than the tuition at any other Montessori school. So just because it's located in an area where people of color live does not mean, in this case, that it's actually accessible for low income people.
Wow.
These things are separate. And listen, by the way, I'm so glad that school exists, right? Because the families who are there recognized a need for their children that wasn't going to get met in their zoned, option. And so they found this. And I'm glad that those families also, by the way, have the means to pay for it. Now, I wish they weren't double paying and also paying for the school that's not working down the street, but that's
Well, listen, that's not exactly a different story in some ways, because I haven't asked you about this, but how do you combat the mythology about school choice and private schools? If you watch me on Twitter, I'm like a magnet for all of the myths about school choice. Yeah. So, and the first one, starting at the very top, is this is just a way to siphon money off of the mainline district system. You having that choice and me having that choice is actually doing damage to the kids that are still within, for instance, in your case, the regular public schools in Nashville. I've been to Nashville, love Nashville, by the way. Could never afford to live there, but love it. But I asked a couple of people, because, I'm into musicians and celebrity and all that stuff, and just what do people do here? So
new music museum.
And which I'm sure didn't cost any money at all, right? You guys do things big in that city with the money.
Big.
But I thought it was really interesting how big private schooling is actually in a place like Nashville. How do you handle the myths? That's my long-winded way of getting to that question. You're hurting kids by having choice, by pulling your kids out of district schools and putting them in these other schools.
Yeah. Well, the callous way to do it, I try not to. I've tried
you don't engage
through the process of sanctification. I have tried to purge myself of that. The callous way is to say, in some respect, I'm not worried. I don't spend my time thinking about whether or not I'm harming other schools. I spend my time thinking about whether or not I'm benefiting students, and I encourage parents to do the same thing. Are you if you sending your child to a school building is going to harm your child but benefit the school building, then that's on you. But that is not something that I'm going to do with my children. I'm not going to send my children into a setting that makes them objectively and subjectively worse off for the benefit of some brick and mortar system that hasn't been able to get it right despite billions of dollars for decades. I'm just not going to do that.
Love it. That's straight up. That's the best answer, is if you believe I'm supposed to sacrifice my kid to some system that was never for us and never designed by us. I get where there are some people in the world where the system was built for them and it worked really well. So they have no concept that maybe this didn't work out for other people. They're like babies. Yeah. They're like baby thinkers. They're like little bitty baby thinkers. Oh my God, this was so wonderful. I went to prom and I drove a Camaro and blah, blah, blah. And you're kind of like, you had a great experience, but wake up, dummy. You're not the whole experience. The world is bigger than you. Maybe that system, it's like the people who have a dad who's a cop or a dad who's a judge or whatever, and they're blinded by the idea that we have to be vigilant sometimes about who's serving us, right? Yeah. What part of government is serving us, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, how much of that did we see, frankly, that COVID removed some of the scales for a lot of parents, And I think a lot of parents who were in those settings, who were in the more like idyllic setting. There's a school in Nashville that I drove up to once, and this was because I was meeting with some parents, and I remember driving up, and later on my wife said, well, how was that school? And I said, it was like Disney World. I said, I drove up, and I kid you not, every parent I saw, well, one, it's some random time in the middle of the day. Why are there so many parents here, like walking hand in hand with their kids? Because you've got the freedom you've got your job situation allows you to do that, right? Start there. That's a big difference. It was just this idyllic setting. Well, a lot of those same parents, because of COVID, realized, oh, wait a minute, this is not working. This so-called, digital delivery that we're getting anyway, this is not what we expect. This is not why we're house poor and live in this nice neighborhood. And, I think a lot of families who have never had a quality experience sort of were kind of on the sidelines going like, hey, welcome to this party. This is where the real party has been.
Yeah. I think, it's a great point just in that the deal that the government is giving you right now, which is just hold on, just wait a little bit longer. As parents are starting to look at, number one, like, listen, our kids are all in remote education right now. It's crap. And the kids know it. The kids are not dumb. The kids are like, they're not teaching us anything. They're not even teaching. They're not even trying to teach. They're basically giving us, some office hours and some videos. Now, it's not all on the teachers and on their side. It's also on your kids' side. Your kids just aren't used to learning this way. So it's really turning them off. So they're probably not giving the effort that they should give either. But I think you're right. Blinders off for a lot of families. Like now it's choice is becoming, there's been some other research that's coming out that just basically says that support for alternative means of education have went through the roof. Right.
Well, and that it should surprise us. And I actually had a public school administrator in Chattanooga said, I was on a call with her, and I really respect her as an educator, as a school leader. I think, she's, because I say that to say, like, we are not a private school advocacy organization. So there's good educators all over the place. There's, bad educators all over the place. She's one of the good ones. That being said, she is generally speaking not supportive of private school choice. But she said, and she's a leader of color. She's a woman of color. She said, listen, I hesitate to say this. She said, it hurts me to say this, but if we had in our case in Tennessee, it's an education savings account program. She said, if we had that program up and running, there would be thousands of kids in Nashville, in Memphis, mostly kids of color, all lower income students who are in buildings learning. Instead, they're getting served up nonsense remotely the entire year. And I think that's right. And, again, an in-person setting doesn't make sense, may not make sense for everyone's family, so I'm not here to impose that on people, because you've got to make the decision for your own family. But if you wanted that option and you were in two of our biggest cities in Tennessee, you didn't have it.
Meanwhile, you're
looking down the street. And you're looking down the street, and there's private schools are like, okay, we're open for business, and there haven't been any apocalyptic breakdowns. And we just think that that's not how it should be. That's not serving our communities well. Yeah.
Well, we're learning where the power is. I think with private schools, they are smaller and more nimble, and they can make decisions. They don't have to wait for some bigger body to make straight up decisions. And they don't have to sit around and negotiate with their staff on dumb things like, you guys want to go back? I mean, we bought a lot of Clorox, and, we did a lot of stuff, you want, and no, we don't. We don't, as you're taking a
Yeah.
phone call from Bermuda on a beach somewhere,
Yeah.
talking about like, yeah,
True
no, it's
story.
not safe to go
True.
back to school,
True story.
so, which is a
True
real
story.
story from Chicago, right?
Oh
Um,
gosh.
well, listen, as we wrap and we come to an end and we land this plane, for people listening and watching, we've been talking in this hour with Shaka Mitchell from American Federation of Children, really regarding this report about making private schooling more of a safe landing, for a safe harbor for diversity, for kids of color, for socioeconomic diversity, for a more representative student body. The report is called "The Warmth of Other Schools." Any last messages, any big headlines that you want to give about it, Shaka?
Well, I mean, again, Chris, thank you so much for giving us the time. I'd also be remiss if I didn't say, like, yeah, this is and I'm sure your listeners are astute and know this, but for maybe first timers, that we borrowed this title from there's a book, of course, that's been a New York Times bestseller, but also from the poem written by Richard Wright in his memoir called Black Boy. And I'd love, if it's all right, I'd love to just read that excerpt, because I
Yeah,
just
go ahead,
he
man.
says it
Go ahead.
he says it so well. He says, and this is all about the ideas, talking about the Great Migration, when many of our ancestors, mine certainly, moved from the American South to other cities in the Midwest: Detroit, Chicago, DC, LA, New York. And he writes, he says, "I was leaving the South to fling myself into the unknown. I was taking a part of the South to transplant in alien soil to see if it could grow differently, if it could drink of new and cool rains, bend in strange winds, respond to the warmth of other suns, and perhaps to bloom." And that's really what we want for our kids. We want them to respond to the warmth of other suns, to see if they can drink from new and cool rains educationally, because many of our kids have just been set to wither. It's time for them to bloom, and that's really what we hope this report does and adds to the conversation. And thanks to all of the folks that were included in the report, because they're doing the real work in schools and across the country to serve our kids.
Awesome. I think that's an amazing landing and a place to land. Again, for people watching, we put the link into the comments so that you can check out the report. It was written by Shaka, but also with co-authors Trent Carlson and Brianna Falduti, also authors on the report. So go check it out. The Warmth of Other Schools. Shaka, I think next year you should put out a report called Sunscreen. What happens when you get to the warmth of other suns and you get sunburned, because it's the North, and you should have had a backup plan.
That's it.
But I love the report. I love what you guys are trying to do in terms of break the stereotype, make private schools part of the revolution that is seeing diversity as a strength, seeing kids of color as people that you should take care of and create cultures and environments in private, public, whatever area and sector of society, where we all do our job to make everybody welcome. So I really appreciate that. At the end of the hour, I will say, let's stop where I started, which is today is a day of action for Brightbeam. We do have this action going on today to get all kids connected, to get internet for all. There's still over 12 million students that lack adequate broadband access in their home, which makes it really hard for them to keep up on their schoolwork. We are a first world nation. We should be able to wire everybody. At the very least, we should be able to make sure that every kid has high-speed access to the world of information and the ability to go to school right now. Because it's the worst we've ever seen. There is such thing as learning loss, and we just can't have families out there that don't have first world connections to the internet to be able to do their schooling. So let's get kids connected. If you want to find out more about our action that we have today, go to voicetoaction.org. Google it if you don't find it right away, or seek me out. Find me on Twitter. You'll find information about this on my handle under at Citizen Stewart on Twitter. Thank you all for watching, for listening, for all of the fam who show up every day, put great comments, and we do read them afterwards. So thank you so much. Shaka, thank you again. I appreciate you.